Nephi and I held each other crying, wailing with broken hearts, humming the melody of the song Baby Lying, so wishing we had learned the words in Mama's native language. Babaling ba mo me, babaling ba mo me, babaling ba mo me mo ma. Babaling ba mo me, babaling ba mo me, babaling ba mo me, baby. Nephew blamed herself for Mama's death because she didn't get the medicine to her fast enough. I blame myself because Mama sacrificed her life to protect mine. Yet life never stops as a slave. Mama protected us more than I realized. The house that looked as if it was covered with grapevines inside was really entangled with deep roots of deception and horror. After our mama died, Nephi and I were taking out the rice fields and brought under the direct supervision of the mistress of the plantation, Widow Devlin. It wasn't until years later that I realized life as a child on the Devlin plantation wasn't normal. The mistress of the house, Widow Devlin, was a retired teacher, and although slaves were not permitted to read and write, she taught a selected few slave girls between 7 and 12 to read and write. Nefertiti and I fell right in between that age group and joined a few of the elite after our mother's death. It wasn't until Widow Devlin began to get a touch of dementia that her lessons turned from tolerable to brutal. Widow Devlin was obsessed with the works of Shakespeare and began to make us girls recite lines from all the works. And if we missed a word or inflection, there were dire consequences, immediately corrected with a thin, long stick. The other plantation owners thought Widow Devlin's hobbies were quite amusing, but her son, Captain Drake Devlin, despised his mother's eccentric ways. It was said that Captain Devlin was a heartless man, and all the slaves were glad when he left for war many years ago. But now he has returned, and Widow Drake was not in her full mental capacity, and everyone at the Devlin plantation was concerned about their fate. When the Shakespearean girls turned 13, they no longer took lessons, but exclusively worked in the house or the fields. Nefertiti had a natural gift for sewing, which she learned from Hilda, one of the slaves that was over the female slaves. Nephi became an excellent seamstress, a talent that seemed to come natural, and anything was better than the rice fields. Nephi was also quick with her sewing, and soon her job became to repair all of the clothing. Nephi was so talented that she even was made responsible for making Widow Devlin evening gown for the Christmas social. Of course, Widow Devlin wanted her dress to look like one of the queens in the Shakespeare plays. Nephi had less than 2 weeks to finish the dress. This time, Widow Devlin wanted seasonal colors of red with white stitch and gold lace, intimately detailed with beads and fake jewels. Nephi worked so hard on that dress, stabbing her fingers with the needles, getting cramps in her hand, working by the dim light of the dawn and candlelight of the dusk, making sure that every detail was perfect. That morning, Christmas Eve, I was in the main house in character of Juliet, while Nefertiti was in our cabin finishing the seams for Widow Devlin's Christmas gown. Many people say that when someone that you love is in danger, you can somehow feel it, and that is how I felt that morning. As I was standing there waiting to recite my lines, all of a sudden it felt like my flesh was on fire. melting, and hot coal was being poured in my open wounds. But I had no such wounds. Then I couldn't breathe, and I grabbed my throat, falling to the floor, gasping for air. The pain was so surreal. I grabbed my hair as if I was going to yank it out of my head to distract from the torture. And then, just like it came, it passed. It was no coincidence that at that exact time, Captain Devlin had entered our slave cabin. I felt Neffy's pain more than a mile away across the plantation. He accused Neffy of stealing Widow Devlin's Christmas gown, whipped her unmercifully, and then dragged her body down to the river. On the way back to the cabin, there were 2 adult slaves waiting for me. The same men that tried to help Mama. Hilda standing in front of them. My heart began to beat so fast I thought it would burst out of my chest. I knew something was terribly wrong, and I began to scream for my Neffy. I remember screaming her name over and over as I glanced in the cabin. I didn't see her, but when I looked down at the door's entry, I could see a trail of blood that led to the river. So I began to run toward the river, screaming her name. I remember Hilda saying, "Catch her. She don't need to see Neffy like that." But my little feet outran those grown men like lioness running at full speed to protect her pride. I only stopped when I found my Neffy. My eyes turned red, not from crying, but anger. She said, "Innocence left my soul that day and replaced myself with fury." I screamed in such agony. I yelled Neffy's name in such pain. Finally, Hilda said to the men, "Just let her be." And I held my sister close in my tiny arms and kissed her on her forehead like Mama used to do, until my eyes swelled shut from tears and my sore throat, full of screams, screeched from pain. The Shakespearean girls I performed with came down to the river at dusk and sat with me till dawn, while Hilda stood on watch. Later, I had them help take Neffy back to the cabin. My arms and legs were so numb from holding Neffy. I couldn't even walk, and Hilda had one of the male slaves carry me back to the cabin. After I regained my strength, I crawled over to the bucket of water, dug it over by Neffy, and began to clean her. I stayed up all night taking some of the beads out of the gown that Neffy's fingers had bled sewing, and made her a gold and silver crown from it of beads. I softly brushed Neffy's hair and placed a crown on her head. I also put Neffy in Widow Devlin's Christmas gown. Neffy would finally have Mama's wish to be a queen. I buried Princess Nefertiti on Christmas Day in Widow Devlin's Christmas gown not far from my cabin. One of the slaves informed Captain Devlin of what I had done that night. The overseers came to my cabin, chained me like a wild beast, and threw me in the iron cage. My head smashed against the iron bars, but when I regained consciousness, I was still in the cage, but now riding in the back of a wagon. I had been sold to a plantation owner in Georgia. That time, I was 11 years old. So our next episode we're going to talk about is the Wellington Plantation, where she meets the love of her life. And through this, of course, the twins were born. So the story